Hey, welcome, Trent. Appreciate you joining me today and helping out with this podcast as guest host. And today you're in the hot seat. You're under the AP.
I
So
feel it.
today I'm just I'm gonna turn the time over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into Wi-Fi, what you've been doing lately, and so on.
Yeah, what I've been doing lately is playing a lot of board games, but
Which ones?
recently, which ones?
Yeah.
Um, I have a new board game that is, it's called Verdant, and it's about organizing houseplants.
Okay.
It's very exciting stuff. Um, how I got into Wi-Fi is it's actually, I'm sure how all of us got into Wi-Fi is probably an interesting story, but um, I was contacted by a guy named Brian Woodings, um, and he reached out to get help writing a press release for a new product that he was going to start selling. And that press release was the Wi-Spy. So I have the unique honor of writing the first press release for a USB spectrum analyzer. And
So why
um,
did Ryan reach out to you? Did you guys know each other previously, or I mean, how did
no,
he?
he knew my father. Yeah,
Oh,
he knew my father. And he just needed some help writing, thought that like a student. So at the time I was in like a communications program in college. And so I wrote the press release, eventually changed majors and went into IT. And when I was in the IT, or it was, some sort of IT management program. We had a class on Wi-Fi, and I was like, I know a guy that makes a spectrum analyzer. And my professor was like, yeah, if you can get him to like show it to us, that'd be great. And so I reached out to Ryan, and Ryan, I think Engadget had recently written a review on the Wi-Spy, and he was swamped, and people were just ordering it like crazy. And so he just needed help handling some things. And so I was an intern at a it was called like I think it was like called a water cooler. It was like one of those, no, it wasn't called a water cooler. It was one of those like incubators. Boise State put on like a incubator program, and so you could rent cheap office space out there.
so what year was this?
I want to say 2007.
7. All right. And I should have, before
2007.
we go further, I should have introduced you a little bit so folks know who you are and why we're talking to you today. So
Oh yeah,
Um, Trent is CWNE number what?
185.
185. Okay.
Is that
So you've
like
been,
mid-range right now? Is that,
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't,
yeah. They're
okay,
like at 450, 460 something right now.
cool.
So you've been around for a while in the industry. You started out, you were talking about um, Ryan Woodings, right? And that company was Metageek, right? That you started out
Yeah,
with.
yep.
So a lot of people in the industry obviously know about Metageek, had probably used tools from Metageek. And so I want to kind of set the stage so people know, okay, Trent, he's been around for a while. He knows what he's talking about. So yeah, carry on.
Yeah, so one of the things that kind of was in the early days of, the Wi-Spy was people were using it to troubleshoot interference. In 2007, there were still like cordless phones that were still around and causing issues and a bunch of other things. Sort of a wild, wild west time. And there was a tool called NetStumbler, and that tool hadn't been updated for a while. And Metageek made a free open source version called Insider. And what they were doing was they were trying to make kind of like a Wi-Fi scanner that they could also use some of that in their tool called Channelizer. And Channelizer is the software that took data from the Wi-Spy, the little USB device, and visualized it in a way to troubleshoot Wi-Fi networks. And so I was at Metageek from 2007 to 2013, and I wore a lot of hats. I started out as an intern, eventually was hired, and did the support, did the technical content writing, did the training, did QA testing, did all sorts of things. And the company eventually grew, I think at most maybe around 30 employees. I think they reached the highest peak after I left.
So you were employee
And
number what?
I don't know. I don't know that number. When I was there in the office in the early days, it was just me and two other guys. So Ryan Woodings and Brian Tuttle. And, seasoned wireless professionals will remember both of those names. They've been at conferences and presented and everything else. Brian Tuttle is at not NetCloud. He's at Cradlepoint now. And Ryan Woodings is still at Metageek. Yeah. And Boise, it's home to some Wi-Fi engineers, and so a lot of people will know Jake Snyder. And Metageek is there. Cradlepoint is based out of Boise, Idaho. And Jake Snyder I actually went to the same company that he did after Metageek. So that was a regional VAR. And it was there that I kind of like really learned networking and selling, and I did the pre-sales and post-sales. So really had to like go from just troubleshooting to, like understanding the value propositions to medium and enterprise organizations.
Now, before you left Metageek, were you CWNE already before you left, or did you get that after leaving?
I got it after. Yep. Yeah. So as soon as I got to the regional VAR, they were like, well, like we'd really like you to get some certifications. And so that's what happened when I was there. From there, worked at the regional VAR, eventually moved to Salt Lake City, and then took a senior Wi-Fi engineer position at the University of Utah. So that was a hospital and a campus gig. And then went to a company called Niansa, which is owned by VMware, and they did user experience monitoring for Wi-Fi. And then now I'm back at Metageek, which is now owned by a company called Avik.
And that happened just recently, right? Just last year, I think it was.
Yep, we're coming up on a year. Yeah,
almost a year now. Okay, I remember. I think my first time I heard of you, you were working with Keith Parsons, testing client devices. And so I think you were there, you were with Metageek, I think at the time. They were using Channelizer. So I think that's why you were there, to kind of help oversee them using the tool. And I don't know, you know better than me, like to what extent you were involved in the testing, but that's where I first, I think, came across your name when I read what Keith had written. I want to say he did maybe a podcast or a video about that as well. But I remember pulling it up and referencing that, that client device.
The stress test.
Stress test, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot. Yeah.
So that was a really interesting experiment. We had our tools there just to make sure that the channel was clear and available for everyone. And then we also had some other tools. There was an air magnet tool there that was doing, it was the Wi-Fi analyzer and a few other things. And we were just kind of like making sure things were fine. But Keith Parsons needed a bunch of like volunteers to help press buttons too. So like we were there kind of like, helping out with that. But yeah,
that's awesome. That's awesome.
I think that's got circled around quite a bit, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, because I mean, people, I know I was very curious about how clients and I'm trying to remember the details of that stress test, but just basically, because I think I was working at Cisco at the time in their WLAN performance testing in Richardson, Texas, and you know, the whole idea of stress testing obviously is something that I actually did at Cisco a lot, and so
Yep.
I was all over that the results of that stress test, and just looking at what you guys did and how you did it and why you did it, and so we can kind of replicate some of those things as well. So it was very useful to me at my job at the time because I was doing a lot of similar things.
Did you ever hear the secret of of why one vendor did better than the others?
The secret? No, I didn't hear the secret.
Yeah, so because there was like a rule that you had to have your code uh publicly available. Like it can't be like secret code that you're running. I believe, you know, the rumors around it. One of the vendors basically, in power save, there's power save mechanisms in place,
Yep.
but basically they said iPads, no power save. And they
So
were
that
able to
helps.
just they were able to keep them awake. And that change was, a fairly significant one and a feature that was added last minute. That's rumors, but
Rumors.
that's what I
All right.
heard.
All right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. There's always something. Vendors always do a great job at trying to squeeze every little bit they can, and if it
Yeah.
means adjusting some some code, then
Yeah. Well,
right.
like it's probably worth it for them in the grand scheme of things. But I thought that like we didn't know about it at the time, and
Sure.
this was something that someone told me after it. But I had no way of verifying it, but
Oh yeah.
thought that was
Okay.
a
That's interesting.
unique thing. Yeah.
I know I've asked Keith over the years, and many people have, when he's going to do the next stress test. Um, and I think he's done with it. I forget what he said, but I think there's a reason why he doesn't want to do it anymore, just because there's maybe all the APs are pretty much the same nowadays, I guess. Um, as far as like the hardware they use, and a lot of the code is just nothing's really new. But I guess it's all changing with each generation of Wi-Fi, right?
Or Keith likes to keep everyone happy.
That could be it too. It
Yeah.
could be it too. Cool. Well, you've been in Wi-Fi for a while. You've
Yep.
worked several places now. Um, is there a particular project that you worked on that was really interesting that caused you to learn more than you thought you would? Tell us about something in a highlight in your career where your skills, for example, just really took off, or you did something like really interesting to solve a problem.
Probably my most favorite project that I worked on was a large overhaul of the University of Utah's Wi-Fi network. And so what had
How
happened,
many APs they have in that network,
I
roughly?
think when we got started, we had about 8,000 APs.
Wow.
And then when we were done, we had 11,000.
So that's a big network.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so before the pandemic got started, we were trying to um, work on leadership to get more budget for Wi-Fi. And one of the things that was we were up against was, the life cycle of the APs was getting around 10 years per AP. And I think Curtis Larson will probably, if he were to ever hear this, he would probably get after me and he'd say, no, it's more like 12 years. So, it's been two plus years since I've been at the U. So some of these events may be foggy, but I did a bunch of interviews with universities that we kind of felt might be doing it right. And so I called up friends, you know, at all these universities and kind of asked them questions about deployment and how they do it, what they hire out, how they measure it, and kind of tried to get a guess from each person of like, you know, the density of their APs. And that was, you know, an AP per square foot ratio, which we all agree is like out, you know, not a real thing, but it was something that like we had to kind of like show that, you know, our average per square foot per AP was 2,800 square feet, and we have other institutions that are below 1,500 square feet per
You know,
AP.
you say that, you know, as wireless engineers, we love to say that square feet per AP is not really a good reference, right? But we all use it, you know.
Totally.
We all have to admit that, you know, yeah, it's a rule of thumb. It's a rough estimate. We don't like to say that we use that really as a guideline in our designs, but we all, to some extent, have. I mean, I use it fairly regularly. I mentioned square
I
feet per AP, and you know, something.
Yeah, so
Be
I
honest
use it
about.
as kind of a sanity check.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that like one of the things that I had done with the ECHO reports was just part of that report is, you know, the square footage areas, something like that.
yeah.
But long story short, I interviewed a bunch of things, presented it to, you know, the C-suite at the University of Utah. And then the pandemic hit. And there's a bunch of CARES funding that came into play. And they were like, I remember this one project where they said that we, you know, at our current rate, we will get to modern Wi-Fi standards in 20 years. Like that's how long it was going to take us. And so we got a big chunk of CARES money to fix 80 buildings in 6 months. So we added about 3,000 APs.
And when you say fix, you're saying fix the Wi-Fi for those 80 buildings, right?
Yeah, because it hadn't been touched for 10 to 12 years.
Wow.
And, you know, going back to how Wi-Fi was designed in 2010. No, Curtis was around that time, but like he's come a long way. He's very, very intelligent, follows all the podcasts, stays in touch. But you know, the funding was something that he just ran up against. And so we went to the C-suites, presented that, and then we had to come up with a way to quickly redesign 80 buildings and add about 3,000 access points. And so that project flew. And you know, this is the early days of the pandemic, so you know, all the students were not on campus, which allowed us to like
Yeah,
get in there,
yeah.
do everything really quickly, and implement a lot of things. So
So
I
did
saw that you
you
had, go ahead.
did you go in and do a lot of like passive surveys, or was a lot of it strictly predictive surveys that you just implemented? I mean, how did you come up with, you know, how many
What we
APs you
did,
needed and where?
yeah. So what we would do is we would take a handful of APs, set them to the same channel and same transmit power, and then we would survey most of the building, and then we would rebuild that in a predictive thing and match the coverage the best that we could of that AP model.
Hmm.
And
So,
so,
so it was like an AP on a stick
yeah,
survey then that you did. You actually put some APs in there and figured out their coverage areas.
you know, I would say that it wasn't like a full AP on a stick, right? We didn't measure at each position, but what we were doing is we were saying, okay, we put this AP here, and you know, here to the AP cell edge, we had, you know, 3 or 4 walls in between that. And then we would mass edit walls. so that the coverage would match up. So we would kind of
Nice.
trick, not trick, but like we would take all the walls and we would come up with like 3.7 dB. And then all of a sudden it looked really close and looked good enough that we would say, what we're doing in predictive matches what was measured. And so we would say this is the best guess for a building, and then we would,
But it was based off of real world attenuation
yeah,
levels that you guys were seeing, right?
yep,
Yeah,
yep.
that's great.
I prefer that method over, like measure a wall here. We just had so many inconsistent results when we were trying to measure one side versus another side, whether there's a stud in between or who knows what, and you're looking at this measuring thing and you're like, it's just kind of all over the place right now. So we decided that, getting a good enough cell pattern around that was what we did. And then we also had a bunch of automated reports that we had done that, like I built. I love the Ekahau report builder. So I had tons of custom reports that ran all the visualizations that we could, possibly look at. And we would sit there in a team review and just look at the design, the survey, and, make sure that it matches and, say, hey, these APs were, this one has too many, because we use that visualization to say, the other thing that Ekahau reports is you have the map view, but then you also have the little histogram that shows the number of APs that overlap and the things like that. So we had that on a report that just we could consistently look at that. The other thing that I really liked that we did was we would do the design first, and then we would, when we needed to in the 5 gigahertz, we would then use the Uni 2 and Uni 2E channels. So we would salt and pepper those. So we made sure that we had good coverage with the standard supported 5 gigahertz channels, and then fill in with the other ones.
So
because we know, go ahead.
When you put that design together, I mean, what client device were you designing around? Did you have a particular device in mind that you kind of used as your primary device?
Yeah, I don't remember what it was. I'll have to ask Curtis. It was like an iPhone 8 or something like that.
Okay.
And I don't remember how we came up with it, but like, like a 3-year-old iPhone, we figured was like kind of what a student might have.
Sure. Yeah, why not? Cool. All right. And so you mentioned you worked with Curtis Larson, right?
Yep.
Anybody else you work with there that other folks might know?
Dave Tomas of Converge One. He was a contractor that worked with us. And he now works at the U. So after that gig, he took a job. He took he replaced me at the U. And then there's Brandon Callahan.
That name sounds familiar for some reason.
Yeah, so he was at the U. He wasn't there when I was there, but he worked for the LDS Church, and then came back later. Okay. But other than that, like there's a few other guys that do Wi-Fi there. I don't know how involved they are in the community. Some of them are involved in the Utah Education Network. So there's a Slack channel for Utah educators that are in Wi-Fi, and that's kind of managed by, or was managed by, Luke, who many people will know. Yeah.
Luke, what's his last name? Do you remember?
Jenkins.
Yeah, Luke Jenkins. That's right. Yeah. Because I'm also here in Utah. I'm in Provo. I've been here for just over 4 years, so I'm learning a lot of the names of the locals.
Yeah.
Of course, Keith Parsons is local to Utah as well. And people know his name. That's why I mentioned.
And Fernie.
And Fernie, yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So you're back at Metageek now. So you were there back in 2007 to, I think you said 2013. Is that right? Or when did you leave?
Yeah, it's 2013.
Okay. And now here we are in 2022, and you're back. Tell us a bit about how that happened, and what are you doing there now that you're back?
I don't actually know how it happened. So I talk to Joel Crane every now and then, and he
Does
mentioned that
he
they were getting,
does he live in Idaho as well?
yeah,
Yeah, I
yep.
thought so. In Boise.
I think he lives suburbs of Boise.
Okay,
Um, I used to live in Boise, so I was a little bit of a Boise snob. Um, but I mean, it's all the same thing. Yeah, like
sure.
he lives
Boise's not a huge
within.
town, so
Yeah, yes, I think he's probably maybe 20 minutes out. I actually don't even know. But so I talk to him every now and then, and he mentioned that a company called Auvik bought Metageek. Is a little bit of a bummer for him because he had been working on kind of this, like he had left Mist to go back to Metageek, and it was kind of like he really it was a passion project for him. He really cared about Metageek and felt like they needed to like, I think he and I both agreed that like IPA was like cool but wasn't done, and um a live tool would be of interest. And so he kind of kept me updated on some of those things. And when I personally felt that like 80% of our work is of the work that we want to do, of troubleshooting needs to be done in the cloud. And so I was a little bit more interested about the acquisition of Metageek when there was a cloud component there. So um, Joel said that he was likely going to leave, and I was like, okay, well, good luck finding someone, like. And he's like, would you be interested? I'm like, I don't know. I mean, uh, maybe. And that's shortly after Ryan reached out and was like, hey, I think you'd be a good fit. You know all the tools, you have the experience. Um, and so what I had the most interviews I've had for a job before a job offer came through. And a lot of it was me wanting to have my questions answered of
hmm.
like, are you guys going to do cool stuff in the cloud? And
Because it wasn't just the folks at Metageek now, right? Because now they're owned by Auvik, is that how you pronounce it?
yep,
And
yep.
so I'm sure you had to talk to folks at Auvik to make sure to find out what their vision was for Metageek, right?
Yeah, actually that's all I talked to. I didn't actually interview with Ryan at all.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. So um I actually report to a VP at Auvik, um and not Ryan. And so some of
Interesting.
those pieces, yeah, it's very interesting. Some of those pieces are, up to me. Ryan is still doing cool stuff. I think he's pretty excited about the pieces that he's working on. And one of those pieces is basically they have an agent on computers that is going to feed synthetic tests and um, metric data to the cloud. And so, what can come out of that someday is, kind of a real-time site survey of,
Now, this isn't top secret classified stuff that you're sharing with us now, is it?
well, none of that exists, but I'm just saying like, what is capable of that is exactly that. Like,
So
yeah.
I heard you say my interpretation of what you just said was Metageek is working on a client agent that you can install on client devices, right?
Yeah, and that was actually a public tool during the pandemic that Metageek
Oh,
came out with.
so
Yeah,
what's the name
so
of that
that
tool?
it was called Signify.
Signify. Okay.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
think it is on the website anymore, but that is one piece that caught Avik's attention initially, is there was a work from home component that existed.
So the agent would run various performance tests and then report back on like signal quality and things like that?
Yep.
Okay.
And one of the fundamental beliefs of Aavik is, you know, users need to kind of be more aware of what is I don't know how to say this right, but like, because this is going to come off wrong. I really believe in like compassionate and empathetic IT support, but also like if a user is able to see that it is their issue and not the network, you know, not the IT team's problem, then they're less likely to open up a ticket and, you know,
And then
waste a bunch of people's
waste time.
time.
Sure. No, that's great.
And so that's kind of a piece that they wanted, was to just like help users understand that like you probably need to be closer to your Wi-Fi network at home, or, you know, other things. So that is a kind of an interesting piece, is they're just helping users kind of like, you know, figure out to move a little bit closer and, you know, maybe change a few habits to have a better performance of whatever they're doing.
Sure. Well, that's
Yep.
great. Well, I think we'll have to revisit that a little bit. I think a lot of people are probably curious about what Metageek is doing. You know, now that you're back, what you're working on, you know, what's the roadmap like? Are things changing now that they're owned by Aavik, and how so? And what does that how does it impact the Wi-Fi tools that we all know and love? You know, I think there's a lot of good discussion there to be had. So we'll have to revisit
Sure.
you and what you're doing at Metageek again on a future episode. But as everyone knows right now, you're helping me with the podcast. You're a guest host, to help keep me in line and keep me focused, which I really need, and I appreciate that. But for now, I think we're out of time. We're going to end it, and
Yeah.
you know, you and I will be together again to interview some other folks here very soon.
Cool.
All right, thanks a lot, Trent. We'll
All
talk
right.
to you later.
Thanks.